All right. Hey, everyone. Happy Sunday. Should we get nerdy with it? I might just cut all the rest of that out and start here. All right. Now that you can hear me and see me, let's do some. Let's get going. All right. So again, very quickly, the social sciences really end up being about the purpose of the social sciences are to try to aspire. Like this is understand from more of a qualitative point of view, from a positivist point of view, to explain or predict what people do, think, or say. And from a positive perspective, where we're adhering to the same norms as the natural sciences in terms of being empirical, looking for causal relationships, thinking about things as having almost a force behind them, we are looking for causal mechanisms that link experiences to actions. Theories are stories of what those causal links are and how they operate in the world. And rational choice has taken traditionally a very empirical and positivist approach, especially like in economics. And that we're going to dive into what rational choice theory is a bit more today. Now, in order to, again, understand the logic behind rational choice theory, you have to understand the philosophy of the ontology, also the phenomenology, how people experience the world. At least our account of how that happens is a building block for why people do the things they do. Typifications. To remind us of what that is, when we come into the world, it is, as children, if we could go back and feel our brains back then, it would be an overwhelming jumble of sensory information with no context. No rhyme, no reason. It's just, colors and sounds and feelings that are all jumbled together. And as we age and we acquire language and our brains are, become more developed and we experience the world and we realize things like object permanence and so forth, then we end up learning typifications. And typifications are a recurring element from our stream of experience. And initially, it's about sort of separating out things broadly. For instance, ground from tree, but then we realize that there's different kinds of, bushes compared to trees, compared to other things. And even within trees, there are like more typifications that we can do farther and farther down. And through this process of conceptual, linguistic, and perception clustering of things together that we construct, they don't occur naturally. We observe things and order them together, organize them together. We then get this what's called the natural attitude, and these are acts of differentiation and this synthesis carried out by my consciousness. And we get to the point in your life where that's just running on automatic. Typifications of people, classify them into types of people and the types of actions that can be expected from them. Now, are these perceptions true and valid? Probably not, right? When it comes to, if you go into the store and someone is standing behind the register with a big plastic, cover in front of him and a big belt where other people are lining up their food, your typification of classifying them and according to their job is obviously correct. However, you can see that these typifications only require some sort of acts of experience. There's no checks on them for their truthfulness or their veracity, right? But our experiences day to day of, for instance, knowing gravity works, knowing what time the bus comes, what time, how much parking is, the best time to go for parking, things like this becomes our common sense and taken for granted knowledge of the physical world, but also the social world and our place in it. And this is where people tend to mess things up. So our social world is built from a multitude of typifications. And these clusters of typifications are further organized into a meaning context. So these also build up into granted stocks of knowledge, which we share with others. And again, there's no quality control here. In the 11th century, scholasticism was a stock of knowledge that Christian theologians shared with each other. To the extent that it's related to the world is, the other thing too is astrology is a stock of knowledge. Now, it might be, knowledge here is carrying a lot of weight, but the fact is that people do try to account for things in the world, and collectively these stories get built up and they become knowledge. Whether that's about the flood, or what happened at Agincourt. These social pools of stocks of knowledge are the foundation for cultures. And these stocks of knowledge guide our social relationships and our social structures. You're born, you're predetermined in your life, like where you're going to be located by a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with anything to do with you, but what came before, whether it's relationships or social structures, these types of things. Right. Next up. Okay. And yeah, we're building on this notion of phenomenology, our experience of the world. And we're moving to a step of how we navigate this world. How can we understand as social scientists how people make their decisions? And one theory, we're going to be looking at the more economics perspective of it, and we're eventually going to move next time to some other non-quite so materialist perspectives. But it's this idea that instrumentality, that is a pursuit of practical ends, is what mostly characterizes this form of rational choice theory. So Schultz saw rationality as an instrumental one. And again, this pursuit of practical ends. But we are in a new chapter now. So there's new stuff flooding at Agincourt. Yeah, that's what happened. If you are following along, which, you have to be a real geek to get through this book. But today we're going to cover pages 84 to 86. Not 84 to 84. Kristi was just thinking too much about the number 84 and not enough about the number 86. We're not. All right, there we go. That's fixed now. This book is so dense, it really does require going through like 2 or 3 pages at a time. And this is easier than The Social Construction of Reality, if I'm honest. That book is so good, but it's such heavy lifting. And eventually it was just draining me too much to continue on with that book, because Berger and Luckman write like Germans, which is not an insult. It's not an insult. But there's a way that people construct sentences in English. We have a sense of this sort of parsimony and having a mix of longer and shorter sentences aesthetically to break things up. And we like to have, one idea per sentence, or maybe 2 ideas, or one idea and an elaboration per sentence. But the Germans kind of have these longer sentences that can go on for a while, that contain a lot of information, and just unpacking like one sentence in The Social Construction of Reality was taking so much. Right. Phenomenology, not the study of me. Yeah. Right. We've got this notion of rationality as an instrumental one, and the pursuing of practical ends. I'm referring to this Berger and Luckman, The Social Construction of Reality, because again, that was a book that really shaped my understanding of social constructionism. And those 2 authors relied heavily on Schultz. So this is like a whole intellectual ancestry we're going back into. However, Berger and Luckman integrated phenomenological ideas with more structural and materialist explanations. Let me give you a quick example from Berger and Luckman about how they did this. Because I did read the book. At least I've got that going for me. I'm going to try something else here for a quick second. Let me just do something. All right, I think that's about the same. I think I prefer to have my volume about there, louder on my unit and less on my microphone, because I don't want to pick up quite so many things on the mic, but I do want to amplify the sound coming out. So hopefully, I'm just worried about my fan going off and you guys hearing that in the background. All right. Berger and Luckman, when they talk about this integration of structural and materialist explanations in The Social Construction of Reality, I think a very good example is this. Let's say that we have a kind of like a thought experiment. Okay, we're going to do a bit like Hobbes in The State of Nature, except in this case, we're going to imagine an interaction where like 2 people in a time before people had interacted with each other, or at least a certain group of people interacted with each other. Right, 2 women from different groups who have not encountered each other before are out exploring an area, and they do encounter each other for the first time. And let's say, as part of this encounter, one of the women raises 2 of her hands to say, "Oh, look, I'm not armed." And the other woman puts her hands out like this, in a sort of like this gesture. Can you see it? Yeah, all right. You can see how I'm so tiny within the camera. She does this, right? So you get this, and this. And in this interaction, it's like, okay, completely hypothetical. There's no conflict, right? They just kind of like, and they check each other out and they go their separate ways. A couple days later, they encounter each other again. And the last time that they did their, the first one's like, oh, I'll do my hand symbols. Does this, and the other one does this. And they establish this pattern where they just take these, these whatever gestures, right? And now to demonstrate they're non-threatening, let's say this happens again and again, to the point where they actually start to build this up as a greeting, right? One goes, hey, and the other one goes, ho, or he, whatever. Right? Now, there's nothing inherently meaningful about these actions. There's nothing inherently meaningful about a word you associate with this action. However, what these two women have established together is that this is a way of signaling that you're not threatening. Right? So now the woman is out with some other women and sees a person from that tribe, and the other person's like really spooked. And the first person goes, no, it's okay, watch. And then he goes, he. And the other person answers, hey. And this now has become a form of communication that's building up trust, right? This is a thought experiment. I'm not saying this really happened, but you can see how that you've now established two things. One, between two actors, you've established an agreed upon meeting of a series of symbols and sounds. And, let's say this moved forward and became kind of like our handshake or hello between these two groups, right? Point two is that the originators have now passed it on to other people to share the meaning within the group and then between the groups. We are now building up a custom. We're now building up a social norm. And it was essentially random. It wasn't predetermined. It had to be he, ho, or whatever else, right? These are just contingencies of experience. But if it passes on to someone else, now this becomes knowledge. Ta-da! You've now created knowledge, a stock of knowledge about how to interact with members from this other group. And it is still arbitrary. It still is very flexible of being changed or modified at this point. But once it's moving and becoming part of not just two people's interactions, but group interactions, now it becomes, like I said, a custom. This is where it gets really interesting, right? Because at this point, everyone has agency and understands that this interaction, the he, ha, or hey interaction, is just, it's tentative. It doesn't have a lot of meaning yet. There's no solidity behind it, even though it's becoming more accepted. But let's say these two groups now start interacting and they do their little symbols when they see each other to indicate, and they start doing more and more, and they start, other members of their groups also engage in these interactions. And then they start teaching their kids these interactions. From the child's perspective, this is as much a custom as anything else. It's not arbitrary. It's not ephemeral. It's not contingent. It's not just a random thing. This is what you do. It is truth. So by the time you get to a second generation, third generation, things that were initially developed perhaps by coincidence or circumstances or unplanned can solidify into a custom or a practice. And for the children, let's say the grandchildren of the hey, ha, ho, whatever, like greetings, this is what is done. It is just accepted truth that the way you greet a member from this other group is to go he, and then they're going to go hey, and that's how you start a conversation. And that is not even questioned anymore. And if you fail to do this, you've now committed a social faux pas. You've broken a social rule. And this is what I think the great insight for me, along with some other things, of how Berger and Luckman think about these processes of how arbitrary human symbols and sounds and signs end up becoming determinants of social interactions. They, therefore, like I said, they integrate the notion of phenomenological ideas with structural and material explanations. So I think that that's important to understand, like, where rational choice perspectives are coming from. Okay. I want to say just my audio still it must not be. I must have done an okay job swapping up my gains and my. All right, no one's complaining, so I assume y'all still hear me just fine. Okay, come on. Here we go. Oh, hold on. I need to close a window. There we go. I had something running in the background this whole time. I had meant to turn off. Right now, trying not to stream. I am walking. I'm rocking the Where's Waldo? Where's Kristi? That was a question we were asking earlier when I couldn't get my camera to work. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the more, especially in Western societies and in economics, the far more commonly used approach to rational choice theory is understanding. I'm just going to preview ahead a little bit because this will be really interesting. We're going to look next at part 2, which is pragmatism in symbolic interactionism. That's the next bit. When we get through that, we're going to look at reasons and causes. Very fascinating. Then also, I think the one here in this chapter is called individualism, holism, and functional explanation. So that's what we've got to look forward to. But then in chapter 6, we've got rationality as rules following, cultures, traditions, and hermeneutics, and we're going to start to draw on the ideas of Wittgenstein, which will be very exciting. Okay, so economics and rational choice theory. This particular approach to rational choice theory developed, as you can see here on the slides, out of the latter half of the 19th century, around the same time that people were doing behaviorist and utilitarianist philosophies and developing them as utilitarianism as a philosophy and behaviorist psychology within psychology. There's a causal mechanism that is at the core of this idea. And again, a causal mechanism is a story about why we think things are linked. What happens? Why what happens and not something else. So the basic causal mechanism within rational choice theories in this perspective, or rational choice theory in this perspective, is that people will act in ways that will bring them benefits and avoid actions that will not bring them benefits. Okay, so this is a little bit stronger than people will act in ways that bring them benefits and avoid actions that will bring them harm. Right? This is the way that this is phrased, at least in terms of this text, is that avoiding actions that will not bring them benefits is a pretty rigorous one. Because if you think about it mechanically, what that means is there's a benefit to being lazy. Right? And I think that is kind of what this is capturing. The choices aren't we do things that bring us benefits or we do things that we avoid things that hurt us. But basically, like if I see garbage floating around the street and I am not moved by some sense of, civic obligation to do my bit, I'll probably just walk right past it, right? Because my calculation is it's not really worth my physical energy to bend over and pick up this piece of potentially skanky, gross trash and take it to the next trash bin. I'm too busy. They pay people for this. So to think about it as well as actions that will not bring benefits. Next slide. This theory of exchange or exchange theory, I guess that's the phrase I should have put in the last slide. Probably I should have put exchange theory right here, but this predicts people will I think this is building on exchange theory. So exchange theory predicts that people will exchange activities when they're seeking to maximize profits. And profits here isn't just money profits, but it's profiting in terms of what we value, and that might be time or relaxation, or it might be money. Okay, so we don't just think about this in terms of maximizing profits as needing to have a monetary component. Anything that is beneficial to you. So in this case, if it is the case that for me, having my weekends to do this show, to do my D&D, to have some relaxation time is worth enough, then I would prefer, I pay someone to come and clean my house twice a month. Just to do like the basics. Right? It's not every day. Like just someone to come in for an hour and a half twice a month. and clean the things that, I was just like, it would take up my weekend to do. And I don't, so, right. So I play for a house cleaner because psychologically I need a break. I want my weekends. And the assumption here is that the cleaner has decided that the satisfaction of earning money is greater than the free time. And so they are converting their labor and exchanging it for money because that brings them more satisfaction. Satisfaction here is carrying a lot of weight, right? I'm not precisely defining satisfaction, but that is the theoretical framework. And a way, not the way, but a way to think about society is to see society as a series of decisions and exchanges. And this would honestly work regardless of the economic system, because people can't make everything they need. So we have to, we have to be able to engage in exchange in order to get all of the things that we need. Society is specialized and compartmentalized and things like that. And the way that we do those exchanges is by making personal calculations in terms of resources. That resource is time or money or affection, right? You can get pretty pathological with some of the, everyone's doing calculations to maximize their utility all the time. But it is at least true to the theory that is being tested, right? And at the end of the day, this theory is only as good as the observations it can account for. And some theories work better in certain situations than others. And humans are complicated, and that's okay. You can have multiple causal mechanisms in operation at any given time. And it's the challenge of social science, the challenge to the social scientist is to try to identify from a positivist or empirical, positive plus empirical perspective, how many of those causal mechanisms can you determine are in operation and which ones have, greater influence than others, or which groups use ones more than others or less. So this assumption about looking at all of society as a series of decisions, which I spelled wrong, and exchanges is one way of looking at the world. And if you have a disposable income, the assumption here is that you are going to rank order your needs into a hierarchy. This is how a person who is behaving rationally this is how they'll behave, right? They have a certain amount of income, and then they have needs and preferences. And the process they go through is deciding how to dispose of that income to fulfill your most important needs or preferences. I think the most heartbreaking version of this are elderly people who are choosing between paying their heating bills and paying their medical bill, their prescription costs, and food. Right? And that is an extreme example, and it's a heartbreaking one, but it is precisely the mechanism at work that is described by rational choice theory. Okay. Do. What is next? All right. Okay, so we talked, if you remember way back, Weber had this concept of the ideal type. And the ideal type isn't meant to represent something that could truly exist or does really exist. It's not meant to be some sort of like platonic ideal form that's, out in the ether. It's a concept, an abstract construct meant to think about in a perfect world, or some examples of things that have all the characteristics of the phenomenon you're interested in. And when we think about what this ideal market type or perfect market would be, it would, from a theoretical point of view, right? Not from a world point of view, not for what we're aiming, but what would, if rational choice were theory were true and operating everywhere, what would the market look like? And it would consist of other free individuals pursuing their own interest and preferences in similar ways. Now, there's a whole bunch of assumptions going on here about free, right? And I think that like the capacity for freedom has a lot of probably normative assumptions sitting behind it. I think it's in the time it was written, code for white guys. But given that we're in a world of intersectionality, we can think about ways that individuals, are restricted, but in this perfect world, they wouldn't be. In this perfect market or ideal market type, those sort of barriers and restrictions wouldn't be interfering with their interests or their preferences. They would be totally free. And the end balance in this non-existent ideal market is a price point where the demand equates with the supply and the largest number of people who are satisfied. Now, it's not about cost benefit. It's not like supply and demand in terms of profitability. Its basis is satisfaction in this case. All right, so that's kind of like Schultz's perspective, and economists have built on that a lot since that was brought out. There's a lot of mathematics that sit behind rational choice theory analysis these days and trying to estimate it. I think I've said this before, but rational choice theory is really good in economics. It does work best there because it came from that field. It came from the field of studying economics. And one of the things I've really, because I didn't do econ at school, I avoided macro and micro economics courses because it didn't appeal to me too much. And I think I had a misunderstanding of what it was. They're invisible hands in your pants. But now learning a bit more about it as I'm approaching, as I'm going to be 50 here soon, and I'm thinking, man, I'm going to retire. I need to like sort some stuff out and get a grip on this before I have to like leave employment. Economics is really the study of psychology. Yeah, there are numbers behind it, and there are economic consequences. But the more I learn about finance and trying to understand the market, it has far more to do with people's perceptions or groups of people using common stocks of knowledge and operating in ways that are predictable. Can I tie this together, right? And about stocks of knowledge? And actually, this might be a fascinating way to bring all this together. So we've got here the social construction of reality, for instance, and we've got these assumptions about how the world will work. So within the financial markets, one of the tools of analysis that they use are Fibonacci numbers. That there is, it is quite often the case that market activity can be in some ways like modeled or structured by using the Fibonacci sequences or Fibonacci numbers. Now, the thing about this is it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if you tell people, okay, well, use this Fibonacci analysis, these numbers, and when the price gets to be 102 farts per share, this is when you should buy. Right, because it's reached this special threshold where now we in the past we have seen this kind of activities after it touches this threshold number on Fibonacci, and so if you buy it now, you know that you've kind of got it at the lowest point, or this is another. Right. The problem with that analysis is that when everyone thinks that it's a case that this number is special, then everyone in the market, well, not everyone, but a lot of people in the market will then react based on this arbitrary number. And that action lends credibility to the structure of analysis. So it's a feedback loop. The more people that accept a mode of analysis and then act accordingly, it has nothing to do with the financial news. It has nothing to do with if the stock has good earnings reportings or whatever else. If you just go strictly by these numbers, then your behavior can be predicted by other people. And they then base their behavior on the assumption of your predicted behavior based on this thing that is started off as just a construct. Okay? So the idea here is that, a lot of market movement in economics is not about business fundamentals or things like that, although of course it helps, but it has way more to do with what people think and what people believe is going to happen. Getting back now to, we're getting close to the end of this section. Oh my gosh, God, these really, like going through these 3 or 4 pages takes up the whole hour, but hopefully you're entertained. Referring back to Weber, and I think Weber is right on this, Weber viewed all social orders as precarious and unstable. And for whatever illusion of solidity that appears when it comes to the rule of law or your rights, what you're entitled, your privileges to travel or whatever, there's nothing really there other than people agreeing that it's there. There's no inherent stability to a constitutional democracy. There's nothing you can count on for the Westminster model, never having problems with things that come up in the future or not being, defeatable. And Weber also saw that market relationships were tying society together. And he saw the validity of the rational choice approach taken by economists, but Weber's conception of rational action is much wider than those of economic rational choice theorists. Econ rational choice theorists really focus on this or take as an assumption that the most distinctive feature of human behavior is our ability to calculate benefits that come from our actions. There's a little bit within political science, there's at least within the people I knew, you get someone who starts studying like rational choice in their master's or PhD theory, and there can be a tendency for them to kind of like turn into a little bit of jerks, right? Because you're always thinking about maximizing your utility, and you're in a world where like maximizing your utility is the norm and it is what people do, right? Therefore, if I get this relation, I'm losing out. Like what does this benefit me? So there's a real, I think, underlying pathology of reducing all human interactions to calculating a cost-benefit analysis. And that's why, it's a useful theory. It works really, really well in economics. I think a hardcore rational choice approach to life will cause you a lot of misery. Yeah, I see Easy 7. This is a libertarian kryptonite here. I don't know. I was thinking with libertarians, they're always trying to maximize their benefits. Right? That just kind of feels like, for me, that's the whole thing with them, is they're always putting themselves and their needs first. So I have a lot of respect for rational choice theory as an explanation. I think it does a pretty good job of explaining some things. I think it's deficient in explaining others. And I think it really needs to be balanced out with some other set of values besides what is best for me. That being said, can I just say, like, having studied people from focus groups as well as voting, a lot of voters do think in terms of how is this party who's going to benefit me more? It's not about an identification. It's not about a sense of commitment to the community. It's who's going to benefit me the most, and that's how they frame their discussions. Whether or not there are emotions underlying that determine that, well, you can have an argument about that. And so, with this view of calculating benefits that come from our actions, you can see all of society as a series of decisions and exchanges. No, that's supposed to be the last one. Okay, I was like, I already did that bit. So I think there's just a little bit more I wanted to highlight, and then we will have time for comments, questions, and queries in the chat. Okay, what else did I highlight here? Oh, yes. So I'll just read out this last paragraph on page 86 by Benton and Crabe. There are important questions to be raised about rational choice theory in terms of its ability to understand the complexity of human motivations, limiting the role of values, and internal contradictions and conflicts in human psychological life. Weber was to some degree critical of the dominance of rationality in Western life, but rational choice theory can be seen as assuming an extension of that rationality to people's internal lives. It is much closer to positivism than Weber, adopting implicitly or explicitly a positivist psychology, behaviorism, which attempts to explain human actions through a process of conditioning involving rewards and punishments, whereas phenomenology is a phenomenon of consciousness. Rational choice theory is closer to a natural science cause and effect model. Yay, Q&A. Yeah, Q&A. That is our section on rational choice theory. If you found this interesting, there is a lot of work done on rational choice theory in quite a lot of the social sciences. It's become a widely adopted and very, commonly referred to and understood explanation of why people do what they do. And essentially, at the end of the day, that's what all social science is about. Okay, so let's see what y'all have to say. My phone's beeping. I don't know what that's about. Okay. Rational choice, A to the K says, rational choice theory makes sense to me from looking at the energy industry in Australia. Exactly. They don't know what the government's going to do, so companies don't do anything beyond jacking up the price. Yes. Yeah. I do think that, again, it can be, it's sometimes easy to not overfit the model. That's a very specific statistical notion. But yeah, if you think of, companies definitely, the best way to understand a company is to use rational choice theory. They are sociopathic. There are no values except money. So when companies act, you always have to think about policy from the terms of what is a rational person going to do, right? Let me use another example here in terms of cost benefit, benefits from our actions, right? It still to this day floors me that the first year doesn't count at British universities. Floors me. People are paying thousands and thousands of pounds, and it doesn't even go to your degree end score, right? Now, there's a lot of bad excuses from British people, or British academics even, defending this practice. But let's say you're a first-year student, and you're not interested in getting the highest score. You're there to get a decent score, but you're not gonna, really work to get that first. Like a 2.2, 2.1, whatever. It's fine. And you're the first year at university, first year on your own, and you have to go to classes, 4 times a week and a seminar, right? And imagine knowing as you started this out, as some British people in the audience might have, as long as I get a 40, right? So, and 40, I have to explain the British system a little bit. Like a 40 is a D and a 70 is like a first. And if you get an 80 or 90, you're like probably a PhD student cosplaying as a master's student. Like it's very difficult to get 85s and 90s in the British system. But you're looking for a D, essentially. You're looking for a third. As long as you can get past that, you're fine. You're going to make it on to your next year, and then you don't even have to worry about the marks in your first year. It's only your second and third year that you really have to care about your marks. Where is your motivation? Where is the cost-benefit analysis there? Who's going to spend all their time perfecting your references, really doing a good job on something, when at the end of the day, your marks are not going to count? So I think that's a really good application of, like, you have to think about when you have a policy, people will act rationally. They will do whatever is, in their interest. And a lot of policymakers, and I'm going to say this too, if you try to organize laws against campaign finance reform, you have to expect that people with a lot of money will try to find a way around it. Because that's in their rational interest. You can't stop people from, trying to game the system or maximize their utilities. And so you really have to think about what kind of incentives are you providing when you put a policy in place. And they might be perverse incentives that come about as a consequence. But people are always going to do the least amount of work and spend the least amount of money to get the thing they want. And, so that's a thing to think about. Let's see. A to the K. Oh, Shelley says it's a cancerous bloat on the body politics. Easy 7. Political voting, in my opinion, is mostly about identity as well. People tend to vote for the candidates who they feel is most like them. The thing is that there's different models for different voters. So you have, for instance, like the party identification model. That is my model. I will never vote for a Republican. Never. 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 It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how well any other model fits, and like the socio-demographic model. Yes, I'm white. Yes, I'm a woman. Yes, I'm college educated. Yes, I'm Signal. All of these things are like gonna predict that I vote Democratic. But at the end of the day, like for me, consciously, it is because I could never vote Republican. Economic models don't matter. Like cognitive engagement models don't matter. Political engagement models don't matter. I am 100% explained by my party ID. Now, is my party ID explained by my class location, my gender location, my education? Yeah, probably. But if we're only trying to predict vote choice, I'm going to tell you it's because I'm a Democrat and I will never vote Republican. Now, for people who don't have a strong sense of party identification, a really good model for people with basically no party identification or weak or mixed in the past, like they've gone back and forth because they're so weak they don't really like, oh yeah, I'm a Democrat, and then they don't like the Democrats, like, oh, I'm a Republican, right? Economic models, prospective, looking into the future, like what people think about the economy right now and what people think about the economy going forward, are really good predictors for people with low party identification, because what we generally tend to find is that parties who are operating in good economic circumstances will hold their majority or their power, and parties that govern in downtimes are going to suffer, and it will be a change election. So, and I have to think about this. Like, I know okay, so if you think about trying to account for, right, I'll get, okay. I will make a slide, because I want, right. Okay, so Brexit proves a rational actor doesn't exist. Transgrammar girl, I disagree. We became the first country to impose economic sanctions on itself, but people who were willing to pay. This is actually a classic. I'm going to do the model. I'm going to sketch out a model of vote choice, and now so there was. I remember going to the elections, public opinion, and parties vote choice conference years ago, pre-COVID. They were looking at the opinions of people who voted for Brexit, and they gave them trade-offs. They said, would you, if it was the case that there was an economic downturn or economic costs to controlling the borders and controlling immigration, are you willing to take more control over and suffer through the economic consequences? And people who voted for Brexit said yes. So for them, it's entirely rational, because the sense of having control over the economy, again, it's an illusion. The reality doesn't matter. It's what people think is going to happen. That's what they're basing their estimations on. Like, yeah, I can see they would say, I could see the relationship. If we make it harder for people to get into the country, then it's going to be maybe some employment disruptions or whatever. But I am willing to pay that short-term cost for long-term control of immigration. So people knew what they were doing. They just had a different value system there. So yeah, just to this is why I think it's a good understanding when you're saying people don't act rationally. You have to qualify that if you're talking about rational choice theory, because people who voted for Brexit were acting completely rationally based on what they perceived were the costs and benefits and analysis. Or the cost and the benefits of their choice. So if we want to try to predict, I don't want to do that, vote choice. All right, this is what a political science model would look like. So it's been a while since I've done this. I feel like I should get my PhD out and just copy one of those. But so your vote choice, so like the left and right sides of an equation, right? That's not a plus. That should be equals. There we go. No! At least I got my beta. Oh, I'm so excited. I've never had, I didn't do any stat stuff when I had German keyboard, and now I've got the sharp S thing, which is the beta symbol. For the coefficient. How exciting. All right. I wanted to say, people's vote choice. This is going to be a probabilistic model. So it will be a yes-no dichotomous. Let's say, it doesn't really matter, but let's say like the chances of voting for conservative or not. Right, because then it's just it's a logistic regression. Whereas if you try to predict which party, then you have to use multinomial logistic regression, and it gets a bit more complicated because then you need a constant, and a constant has to represent one of the parties, and you have to read all of the other parties and with reference to the constant. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so vote choice will be some constant. Right, so there's a a certain probability of vote choice for everyone, and that constant is one of the things that gets factored in. Plus, let's say B1, which let's say it's like a combination of all your socio-demographic variables, and I mean like we'll say B1 plus B2. We'll just put that here. This isn't really how it would look, but because there's more than 3 socio-demographic variables, but say that. So you've got, for instance, let's say you've got age, income, and education. All right. There's a little of an explanation when it comes to gender in the UK, but we're not doing a real model anyway, right? So you've got these 3 elements of your socio-demographic one, and then you've got another one you want to study, which let's say it's your rational choice, which is your perception of that party in power is going to benefit you personally. Let's say, and then that's our coefficient for that. Plus, oh yeah, well, of course, yeah, we should say party ID would probably go first because party ID, or whatever. So call this one rational choice, rat choice, metric, and then you would get another one here for party ID, PID, and you can test other models, cognitive engagement, attention to politics, whatever else, plus some error. And what we would do then is for each person, you could take their responses for their column on their survey, and you would be able to calculate for each individual their coefficients on this. And so this is more the idea that, you know, you can get different accounts of causal mechanisms that all contribute to the situation. So, you know, yeah, maybe let's say I am a Dem and the economy is going well and I meet all these other things. I mean, what the model describes as my explanation might not match up with my own explanation. The other thing too is like people don't determine why they vote. That's what we do as political scientists. So I will say, hey, it's just party ID. For me, that's it. But if you plugged me into a model, my age, my marital status, my gender, all of those things are probably going to show up as being statistically significant because those characteristics also help predict, allow us to reduce the error we make when predicting other people who look like me. Right. So whether or not I think it's true, it's kind of irrelevant, but in terms of explanation for the models, it works. All right. Gender, fucking everyone's. Oh no! I just like it. All right. Let's hope that it doesn't get caught by the censors and the models or the YouTube speech police. I'll start up here. Let's see, because we were talking about party identification. Okay, yep. Rational in the sense of maximizing what you think. Weren't voters lied to pretty extensively during the campaign? Voters are lied to extensively during all campaigns. That's generally, you know, it's difficult to police because of spin and perspective and all of that. And yeah, in terms of the consequences for it, I think that it would be very difficult. So when you talk about like A to the K, if you want to talk about the consequences of fabrications and lies in a campaign on voters, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg problem, right? Because the people who accept the lies, do they accept them? Do they hold their positions as a consequence of the lies, or do they accept the lies because of the previous position they held? And for some people, it's one, and other people, it's the other way, or they're more open to it in the other direction. And so when you talk about individuals more collectively, it's hard to say, here is the one, you know, this is the directionality of all causal mechanisms. But in terms of, lying, I don't know that lying has any more or less effect than any other campaign communication strategy. You know, I think it probably could look at the impact of, you know, like fear and anger and outrage in messages. Negative ads we know work. We know people might not like them, but they do respond to them. So Brexiteers, yeah, they told lies, yes. All right, what else we got going on here? So that's why framing issues matters so much in politics. Controlling how people see the cost and benefits will influence what is rational for actors to choose. Yes, and parties are competing, I would say, for a message that gives an account of the benefits to the populace from a rational choice, like what is a good cost benefit analysis. And that will depend, though, of course, on the values of the people who are casting the votes. So, yes. Yes, they believe controlling our borders was worth the economic costs because they irrationally disbelieve the. Well, again, you're talking about they in a very big sense here. So, as a political scientist, I can't talk about what people believed unless I have data for it. So, I'm going to put a little right, but there was a feeling that immigration was out of control. Now, whether or not that is a true assessment is a value judgment, right? But that was the narrative, and in the case of them having that view, and then they rated control over the borders as higher than short-term economic suffering. That was what they said at the time. I mean, people are very bad at predicting the future. We know this. So I vote to keep the conservatives from power. Yes, tactical voting is another form of rational choice theory. If you think about it, let's have a think about, all right, let's do a model for a tactical vote, right? Basically, like you're looking at plus. Oh no, not equals, or not plus, equals. Here you've got, let's say, the benefit of the expressive benefit of voting for the party of your choice. Okay, put it this way, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to go vote Labor, let's say. I'm a Labor person. I feel good about Labor. I vote Labor. When I vote Labor, I feel like I'm engaging in an authentic identity, right? But then you also have probably something like I'm making this up. This isn't an official like vote model on tactical voting, right? I would have to go look that up. But I'm thinking it through right now with you. So, don't hold me to this as being truthful 100% of the time. But then you have the narrowness, call it the narrowness. Okay. So B1 is, we'll call this expressive instead. Okay. And then over here, you're going to have theoretically, and there is a difference between B's and those other coefficient B's, but I'm not going to, I'm just playing around with my keyboard these days. People are going to be like, oh, no, you did the wrong one. Okay. The expressive benefit here, you have the marginality. And the marginality sort of stands for okay, so let's say that the marginality is of Lib Dem to conservative, right? So here's your expressive Labor vote. And that would, oh yeah, I like doing my identity. And let's say also that you've got a really, really marginal seat. The difference at the last election between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives was 1.2%. All right. You are never going to be the person who determines the election. So that ideal for your vote making the biggest difference possible will never become reality. But the more marginal your district, the higher likelihood is that if you and a few more people like you act collectively and tactically, you can keep out a party you dislike more. Right? And there's another thing too that you would have to have here, which would be probably, maybe become 4 in the model, but is your dislike of the party in power. So what you would basically be weighing up here is, okay, I really dislike party P. I really like voting for my own party because it makes me feel good. But I also have this chance, I can't get the party I want, but I can keep out the party I hate. And so I don't know if this is of interest to you, but you can think about breaking down the elements of the decision here into smaller contained bits that interact, what builds that final calculation. And a lot of times, marginality of a district is a really good predictor. The narrower the victory, the more likely you're going to get people in that constituency describing their votes as tactical. Whether it's UKIP people trying to support the Tories to keep Labour out, or Labour voters, voting Lib Dem, or Lib Dem voting, Lib Dem voters tend to vote like for a lot of different parties. So it's not always the same directionality. But yeah, that's how you can sort of conceptualize that, the process of tactical voting. What are the things that people are calculating? What are the things that they're factoring into their decisions? All right, let's see. I like Labour, but Lib Dems are polling better in my electorate, and that's what's really... Yeah, I mean, I got that in focus groups all the time. I also got... can I just tell you like a little story from 2010? Yeah, coalition days, right? So we had all these people. I had quite a number of people, maybe 5 or 6. My focus groups were only like 40 to 70 people at that time. But like 5 of them decided tactically to vote for Liberal Democrats to keep Conservatives out. And then after the election, the Liberal Democrats went into coalition with the Conservatives. Now, short term, they were, looking for power and acting rationally, right? However, every person, every voter who was Labour, who trusted them to be a breakwater against the Conservatives, they lost those people forever. I think most of those people forever lost, them as a possible Lib Dem voter. Maybe now under a couple different leaders, they're rethinking it, but the Labour voters who voted tactically in 2010 were angry. All right. Hey, I've been going an hour now. That was fast. I'm going to get going because I have other things to do today, and I'm running behind on those now too. But thank you for geeking out with me. I do appreciate it. Thank you for the feedback on the music problems, as well as, giving me good things in the chat to work with. Thank you, Trans Gamer Girl. Thank you, A to Decay, to... I think I understand what you're saying, but seeing it as a formula confuses me. I remember the first time I saw my PhD supervisor write out a formula, and I went, that's not political science. Like, I've never seen that. I was like doing undergraduate work. I've never seen a model. But it's very, very helpful to break down the individual components and think about... We can talk, if you want, you can talk a bit more about model testing and how models work. Like, I don't know when, but we could talk about that a little bit more in representation and how that maps onto how surveys are developed and worded and constructed in terms of numerical values in order to do certain kinds of analysis when the data are all collected. All right, good. Yes, have a great day, y'all. Get nerdy with each other in the chat, and we'll see you here next week, Sunday. It is a pain to it's more homework. It's not bad. It's like going out and doing exercise, and you always feel better afterwards. Like, I always feel good after the show. When I'm prepping the show, it's like, oh God, I gotta read this and digest it. But it's good for you. It's good for me. I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Be happy, be healthy, and be well wherever and whenever it is you are. So until then, bye.